The concept of midnight, a time of rest and quietude, was systematically and horrifically weaponized across the entire nation of Ukraine on September 3, 2025, beginning at the stroke of midnight, when the first wave of Iranian-designed Shahed-136 drones, their cheap, buzzing lawnmower engines, a sound now synonymous with terror, cut through the chilly autumn air not in ones or twos, but in a vast, coordinated swarm of over 200 aircraft, launched from positions in Russia, Belarus, and even from the deck of a merchant vessel in the Black Sea, their flight paths a meticulously calculated spiderweb of death designed to overwhelm, confuse, and utterly exhaust the world-class but finite Ukrainian air defense system, a deliberate and cruel strategy to first saturate the sky with cheap, disposable decoys that would force Ukrainian operators to waste their precious and expensive interceptor missiles, thereby peeling back the protective shield over the country layer by layer to allow the far more deadly and valuable weapons that followed to slip through the gaps and deliver a punishing blow to the heart of Ukraine's energy infrastructure, military logistics, and civilian morale, all under the cover of a darkness that offered no comfort, only the terrifying anonymity of death delivered from above. This massive, multi-wave air raid, dubbed Operation Thunderous Reprisal by Russian strategists, was the Kremlin's direct and furious response to the devastating Ukrainian strike that had decimated the 58th Combined Arms Army's command center days earlier, and it was executed with a chilling efficiency and scale that had not been seen since the opening days of the invasion, utilizing a combined arms approach that began not with explosives, but with a sophisticated cyber and electronic warfare offensive that targeted the very neural network of Ukraine's defense. At 23:55, 5 minutes before the first drones even crossed the border, Russian hackers from the GRU's Unit 74455 unleashed a new variant of the Vulcan malware into Ukrainian military and energy sector networks, a weapon designed not to destroy data, but to subtly manipulate it, introducing minute errors into the targeting algorithms of air defense systems and delaying automated alert notifications by critical seconds. While a fleet of Russian Tu-214R electronic warfare aircraft, orbiting just inside Russian airspace, activated their powerful Kibani jamming systems, creating a wide-spectrum barrage of electronic noise that drowned out radar returns, severed encrypted military communications, and rendered GPS guidance unreliable across entire regions, effectively blinding and deafening the Ukrainian defenders at the precise moment they needed their senses the most. As the first wave of Shahids droned relentlessly onward, their intended targets were not military positions, but the air defense batteries themselves. Flying at low altitudes and programmed to loiter over suspected positions of German IRIS-T and American NASAM systems, they acted as bait, forcing the Ukrainians to reveal their locations by opening fire. A tragic choice between expending invaluable missiles or allowing the drones to eventually dive onto their positions, a lose-lose scenario that saw several valuable launchers destroyed even as they successfully swatted dozens of the incoming threats from the sky. Then, precisely 15 minutes after the first drone wave, the second and truly devastating wave arrived, this one consisting of a mixed salvo of over 100 advanced cruise and ballistic missiles, including the hypersonic 3M-22 Zircon launched from a Russian frigate in the Caspian Sea. The air-launched Kh-101 and Kh-555 cruise missiles fired from two 95 ms Bear strategic bombers circling over the Volga River, and the ground-launched 9M723 Iskander-M short-range ballistic missiles screaming in from launch sites in occupied Crimea and Bryansk, their targets carefully chosen for maximum strategic impact. The Dobrotvir and Burshtyn thermal power plants in western Ukraine, critical nodes in the European energy grid, which were struck by a volley of missiles that penetrated transformer halls and boiler rooms, sending massive plumes of black smoke into the night sky and triggering emergency shutdowns that plunged millions of homes into darkness. The railway hubs in Lviv and Kramatorsk, vital conduits for Western military aid, which were pummeled by Iskander missiles carrying cluster munitions that turned rail yards into twisted scrap metal and cratered landscapes, severing a key logistical lifeline, and the headquarters of the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, in Dnipro and the Ministry of Defense Annex in Kiev, which were targeted by the hypersonic zircons in a clear attempt to decapitate the Ukrainian leadership and intelligence apparatus, the missiles striking with such velocity that they seemed to simply disappear into the structures before erupting in a cataclysmic internal explosion that collapsed entire wings of the buildings. The third wave, arriving nearly an hour into the assault, was the most psychologically terrifying, comprised of dozens of elderly but massively destructive Kh-22 anti-ship missiles and even older Soviet-era S-300 anti-aircraft missiles, repurposed for ground attack and fired indiscriminately into the centers of major cities like Kharkiv, Odessa, and Zaporizhia, with poor accuracy and massive city block leveling warheads. These weapons had no military target, their sole purpose to terrorize the civilian population, to break their will, and to overwhelm emergency services with catastrophic casualties, as one such missile struck a residential high-rise in Odessa, reducing it to a pile of smoldering rubble and trapping hundreds of families beneath the debris. For over 3 hours, the relentless bombardment continued without pause, a continuous rolling thunder of explosions, the shriek of incoming munitions, the crump of interceptor missiles, and the constant, mournful wail of air raid sirens that became a soundtrack to apocalypse, forcing millions of men, women, and children to huddle in basements and subway stations, their world shaking around them. Their phones flickering with news of each new city hit, each new power plant destroyed, each new friend or relative missing. The Ukrainian air defenses, heroic and technologically advanced but simply overwhelmed by the sheer volume and complexity of the attack, fought a desperate, running battle, their interceptor missiles streaking into the sky to meet their targets in brilliant, fleeting fireballs that illuminated the nightmare, each successful interception a small victory. But each launch depleting a stockpile that was agonizingly slow to be replenished, forcing heart-wrenching decisions for commanders who had to choose which incoming missile to engage and which city or strategic asset to sacrifice. The human cost, as always, was the most devastating: apartment blocks shattered, hospitals damaged despite their protected status, and emergency responders killed while trying to save others, the streets of many cities running with water from ruptured mains and blood from the wounded, a scene of utter devastation designed to signal that Russia's capacity for violence was limitless and that no Ukrainian was safe from its reach. Yet, even as the fires burned and the scale of the destruction became apparent, the spirit of Ukraine refused to be broken. In blacked-out cities, volunteers used their own vehicles to power mobile charging stations, farmers towed debris from streets with their tractors, and in the subways, strangers shared food and comforted crying children, a powerful testament to the resilience that had come to define the nation. The international response was one of swift condemnation and promises of increased military aid, including the accelerated delivery of F-16 fighter jets and additional Patriot batteries. But for the people of Ukraine, the message of the midnight air raid was clear. The war had entered a new, more brutal, and more desperate phase. One where the front line was everywhere, and no one could be certain of seeing the next sunrise.